Thank you all for joining today. And in today's edition of our webinar, I'm going to actually talk about a topic that has generally not received a lot of attention from uh, CSMs in general and CSM management in particular. And that is, how can a CSM be more effective in influencing product roadmaps, feature enhancement requests, and in some cases, even bug fixes. So this is what we're going to talk about. And without wasting any more of your time, let me get going here. So we are going to cover a few topics listed below that I'll just get to in a minute. And the goal, again, as I said earlier, is to get you comfortable with working with internal stakeholders and get what you need for your customers. Okay, so what is going to be some of the topics that we will cover in this webinar? The first one is we're going to start with working with the internal stakeholders. This is extremely important since CSM groups or teams or organizations don't control product roadmap. They don't control what features are going to be added or not added or the priority of the bug fixes and such. So it becomes imperative for the CSMs to work with teams that do control the product roadmap. That could be product managers, it could be BA team, business analyst team, or titles such as I just mentioned. The second one is how to be the voice of the customer. Your customers you talk to on a daily basis have a lot of requirements. They have a lot of pain points, and they cannot talk to your product teams. You have to talk on their behalf. So how to be the voice of your customer internally is the second topic we will touch upon today. The third one is that you now kind of can represent the customer, but to be able to influence the roadmap such that you get the features that your customers want in a time effective manner, because the product teams are super busy. You will only get so much time for them, and you are super busy, and you only have so much time to talk to the product team and development team. So it's kind of, you're going to touch upon how to effectively communicate the requirements or the customer's pain points or the requests. The fourth topic, which is again one of those things that people don't want to talk about too much, which is you will need help. This is not going to be something that just works. You talk to product manager and hey, I got this requirement, and they just jump up and say, oh, perfect, we're gonna do this, in the next minor release or the next major release or something like that. It generally doesn't play out that way. So calling for help is nothing to be ashamed of. It's a good thing, believe me. And then the last one that we want to touch upon here is maintaining the relationships that you will establish for success for the long haul, right? You want to make sure that you don't burn bridges as you push for some of the requirements and some of the requests from your customers. So those are the kind of the five main topics that we're going to cover today in this webinar. The first one is working with internal stakeholders. Again, this is kind of easier said than done. You may feel that, oh, I'm so good with customers and I can influence customers or understand the pain point, and it should be the same working with internal stakeholders. And believe me, it's not that easy because internal stakeholders have different priorities, they have different motivations, and so be ready to work to establish relationships with your internal stakeholders. It's not a given. It's not just going to happen because you both are sit in the same building or something like that. And I would strongly recommend that CSMs identify the right stakeholders, which includes, as I said, the product development teams, but also one or two executives that know that you are trying to work with people that might report to them. It just, it's good practice to have, somebody be aware of that some of the people are going to be working with you and they might be in meetings together. So just to give them a quick heads up. Most of the time, executives are all fine with that, but still, be courteous and just give them a heads up that you're going to be working with their reports. And to get a conversation going, there are many ways, and I'm not going to talk about that because, as I said, CSMs are good with those kinds of things, breaking ice, icebreakers, making small talk and all those kinds of things. The one thing I do want to call out is making sure that you never kind of start off a conversation with, effort, feature trade-off. So you don't want to start a conversation with, hey, Miss Product Manager, this feature is so easy and you could do it in half a day and I don't understand why it's not being done. So stay away from those kind of conversations. You may be right, but that's not what the product managers or the development managers want to hear. So just a word of caution on that front. But again, once you identify the main stakeholders, talk to them, establish good rapport, and give some heads up to their management team just so that they know that you are working with them and collaborating and trying to provide feedback that you have from your customers. The second thing we want to talk about is, like I said earlier, being the voice of the customer. Customers have many requirements, many requests. They want many things. You internally should prioritize those requests with your management and with your peer groups, because one of the things is that you and your peers should be on the same page. You don't want to each have your own priority list and everybody is giving a different feedback to product managers, and that generally never goes well. So you always want to make sure that you are in sync with the team internally. Now, once you have that, achieve that, which itself is going to be not easy. But anyway, let's assume you get to that point, right? Now, when you talk to the product teams, how do you convey what is important? There are two main parts of this. One is getting across the emotion behind a request, right? And the second is actually cold, hard data, right? So those are the two big buckets, so to speak, of how to most effectively communicate your requests to the product team. The best way to convey emotions that a customer might have behind a request is not to mimic the customer, not to try and role play what the customer told you in a call or a QBR or something. What you really want to do is actually either have quotes that you took during a meeting, or especially these days with webinars, with Zoom-based calls and hybrid workplace that we have, you might have recordings that you might have. Take the piece, take that part of the call recording that you want the product managers to hear, and nothing gets the emotional state of a customer across to a product team better than actually hearing from the customer themselves and how they described it and how important the feature request might be for them. So try to use that as much as possible. The second thing I want to kind of talk about is the data part. Every company, every organization relies on their own favorite data set of data. So, it's not important which data point your company or your organization or your product management team uses. Give them whatever they're looking for, but make sure that you do have that data available. It could be the number of customers asking for a feature. It could be, hey, how much of the revenue is at risk, or churn risk, or partnership status, or you're trying to grow the account. And there can be 50 different ways you can look at the data. But again, make sure that you have good, solid, reliable data to back up your request, and also make sure that the product managers, have visibility into the emotional uh, impact of the request, or not having certain features or feature enhancements or what have you. Okay, and those are your two best friends to get the request across. Moving along is kind of one of the most contentious parts of the conversations, which is getting your feedback incorporated into roadmaps. So how are you going to do this, right? So basically the thing is, you want to make sure that the product teams are looking at the typical target customer persona in the same way as you are. Just because customer success organizations don't, in most companies, do not work with product management on a day-to-day basis, there's going to be some divergence in how our team might look at the target customer personas and how the product team might be looking at it. So it's very important that you get a common understanding, an understanding of this common persona across the organization. And that to me is probably a very important starting point. But once you have the common framework and how you look at target customer persona, the easier everything else is going to follow from that. Again, I mean, focus on, like I said before, focus on what the user is asking for and don't try to interject or don't try to get your opinion across on how it needs to be solved, because that is not your job. That is the job of the product team, the development team and such. Again, create a common framework of how to look at features for the for the target persona of the user of your system or service. Then talk about what the customer is asking for, and as I said in the previous slide, with the data and everything else that you already presented, use all of that to incorporate features and into the product roadmap and try and get a buy-in from the product team. Now, having said all that, it's not going to be easy. As I said earlier, product roadmap discussions can get very contentious, can get, people's people passionate about it. So there could be raised voices and stuff like that. It's all good. It just happens. It's actually something that you should expect. And there will be times when you will realize that your requests are getting, at least in your opinion, are not getting the type of attention they deserve, and that, a lot of the requests coming in from the sales teams with, things like, oh, if we add this feature, we can bring in another X revenue into the company in the next 2 months or 6 months or something like that. So this is going to happen, right? So you have to make sure that you get the emotional state of the request of the customer making requests, the data that we talked about earlier, have all of that available, in, if possible, put them in easy to, understand slides or graphs or something, just so that it's not numbers you are throwing out, because people like to see pictures rather than numbers. So, just some small things to do there. And the one thing I would say is, if need be, right, have the product managers talk to the customers directly. You will be surprised at how many customers are more than willing to talk to product team and express what they're looking for. And good product managers don't want to miss out on those opportunities, because that is one way for them to directly connect with the users of the system that they create, right, with the development team, right? So don't let go of opportunities if you think that will help you get your features in the product roadmap. And offer setting up, mediating a call between the product management, the team, and the customers. And if your company has a customer advisory board, use the feedback, use meeting minutes, anything that can get the point across from the customers to get your features in the product roadmap. Because product roadmaps, as I said earlier, there are many people all trying to push for their favorite features for good reasons. I'm not saying for bad reasons, all for good reasons. But you still need to make sure that you work the system and you get the features that you want in there. Last but not the least, you want to make sure that you maintain your relationships that you are working so hard at. Remember, having good relationships is not something you develop in a day, a week, a month, right? Rome wasn't built in a day, as the cliche goes. So continue to work on relationships. Even if you don't get something this time around, you will have better luck next time. So work at it. And remember, if you may not get the whole request of, whatever full feature that you want, a crawl, walk, run type approach works. Start with something that product team can do or is offering you, and work on it with your customer a little bit. So it's, compromises, is a good thing, right? It's not my way or highway, as they say. Just make sure that, don't lose trust and credibility with the product team, because that is the hardest thing to develop. And beyond that, have an open mind. If they're offering something that be the full solution in the next couple of releases, go for it, right? I mean, is you can always talk to the customer into showing that you made progress on their request. And you may not have gotten everything they want, but at least you got them a start, and that might go a long way, longer way than you might think. Keep your relationships. You need the team. And next month, next quarter, and coming quarter. So maintain relationships. Basically, that's what I'm trying to say. Um, and to wrap up, again, be the voice of the customer and use your feedback from the customers effectively. Be willing to make compromises. Don't try to shoot for the moon. Get what you can without trying to get into too much of the effort type discussions. Oh, this is such an easy thing to do. This shouldn't be a problem. You don't want to really do that. And the last thing is, keep working at the internal relationships. You want to make sure that people that you need, for getting your request into the product roadmaps, and you have a good relationship. So those are kind of like a quick summary of this webinar. And now I'll take questions from the team that's assembled here. Let's open up we'll open it up for questions.